Welcome on board, chosen one. Sit down. Breathe out slowly, the way you do when no one is watching and there is finally no reason to perform. Feel the shift in the air around you right now, because something already moved, and you were the one who moved it. My name is Lucian, and for decades I have watched people break, and I have watched people rise, and I have learned to tell the difference before they say a single word. I watched it in silent rooms, I watched it in loud ones, and I am telling you tonight that you belong to the second kind, the kind that rises, even if the world spent years convincing you otherwise. There was a room. Picture it exactly as it happened. A long table, warm, low light, powerful people leaning into their own importance, voices overlapping, everyone trying to be heard, everyone measuring everyone. And then the most powerful man in that room, the one who never raises his voice because he never has to, leaned back, went quiet, and whispered your name. Just your name, nothing else. And the room froze. The overlapping voices stopped mid-sentence. The clinking stopped. Someone's hand paused above the table. That silence was not an accident. That silence was a verdict. So sit with these questions tonight, because the whole story hangs on them. Why did the quietest man in that room choose your name out of everyone louder and closer and hungrier for his attention? What did he see standing in you that you were never allowed to see in yourself? And why did the loudest one in that room go pale in the very same second, as if he had just heard the sound of his own ending? Hold those, because we will return to that whisper again and again, and you do not yet understand what it meant. Funny how the loudest people in your story went quiet the moment your name carried weight. Funny how the ones who talked over you for years suddenly had nothing to say when someone who actually mattered spoke of you softly. They used to fill every silence with themselves. Now they sit in it. Now they choke on it. Here's the truth they'll never admit. They were never louder than you because they were stronger. They were louder because they were afraid of what your quiet meant. Cute, wasn't it, the way they performed dominance like it was a personality? Adorable, even. Prosperity looked good on them, the way a paper crown looks good on someone who mistook it for gold. When they called you distant, they meant they could not read you, and it terrified them. When they called you too quiet, they meant they could not control you, and control was the only game they knew. When they called you strange, they meant you did not need them, and nothing frightens a small person more than a person who does not need them. That is the decoder. That is the translation of every word they ever aimed at you like a weapon. They handed you insults and thought they were wounds. They were labels, and you wore them like armor without even knowing. But let me stop the comfort here, because comfort is not why you came. You have carried things, real things. The ache of being underestimated by people who were never qualified to measure you. The specific cold of betrayal from the ones you trusted most, the ones who ate at your table and studied your weaknesses at the same time. The loneliness of being surrounded and still unseen. The humiliation of shrinking yourself so others could feel tall. I will not dress that up. I will not make it pretty. You bled in silence for years and told no one, because who would have believed the quiet one was the one hurting most? Before we go deeper, do one small thing. Touch that like button. Not for me. This is how the universe marks that you were here in this exact moment on the night everything turned. And now stay with me, because the room is still frozen and we have only just begun to understand why. That whisper of your name did more than silence a room. It rearranged something. Ever wonder why the universe waited until you had nothing left to prove before it made powerful people say your name in low voices? Because a name spoken loudly is noise. A name spoken quietly by someone who fears wasting words is a signature, and the universe was not done writing yours. This is where most people would tell you the story is over. It is not. It has not even started. Hold on to that whisper. We are going to open it slowly. You are not lucky to be here tonight. You were routed here. Something in you that survived everything they threw at you knew this was coming. And now the frozen room begins to thaw, and every face in it begins to turn, and you are about to understand what they saw that you never let yourself see. For years you lived inside a hall of mirrors, and you did not even know you were in one. Picture one of those mirrors right now, the one that greeted you every morning, the one that leaned in close and murmured, "You're too much," in the exact voice of the person who said it first. Imagine this: a long corridor lined with tall mirrors on both sides, and every single one shows you a version of yourself painted by someone else's hand. In one you are too sensitive. In another you are not enough. In another you are the problem, the difficult one, the one who ruins the mood by simply refusing to fake a smile. You walked that corridor your whole life, and you believed the reflections, because when every mirror agrees, the lie feels like a fact. That was the trap. Not the cruelty, the reflections. They never needed to break you directly. They only needed you to keep looking into the mirrors they built and mistake those distortions for your own face. Here's the part that changes everything, chosen one. Not one of those mirrors was true. Everyone was bent by the hand that made it, and every hand that made one was afraid of what you would see if you ever looked at yourself directly. You might ask yourself now, was I really that blind? No, you are not blind. You are surrounded. A blind person cannot see at all, but you saw perfectly. You just saw only what they placed in front of you. And they placed it everywhere, on purpose, so that no matter which way you turned, another version of their lie was waiting to greet you. That is not weakness. That is what an entire environment built to keep you small looks like from the inside. I watched this same thing happen to a young man years ago. Someone quiet, someone dismissed at every table he sat at. For years he tried to argue with the mirrors, tried to prove he was not what they reflected. He exhausted himself doing it. And then one day, he simply stopped looking at them. He turned his eyes inward instead. Within a year, the people who built those mirrors were the ones asking him for a seat. I watched it with my own eyes, and it changed how I understood every quiet person I have met since. They hate that you are starting to look away from their mirrors. They hate it because those mirrors were their only leverage. Strip a manipulator of your distorted reflection, and you strip them of the entire game. Here's the truth they will never say out loud. They did not spend years shaping how you saw yourself because you were weak. They did it because they knew that if you ever saw yourself clearly, you would be untouchable. And that is exactly what is happening now, mirror by mirror, crack by crack. You spent so long fixing the reflection when the reflection was never yours to fix. That is why nothing you did ever satisfied them. You could improve endlessly, and the mirror would still show a flaw, because the flaw was painted into the glass, not into you. Adjust yourself all you want. The distortion stays. That was the design. And the moment you understand it was a design and not a truth, the corridor loses its power over you completely. Look who is walking that hall now with open eyes. Look who stopped flinching at the reflections. The universe did not put you in the hall of mirrors to punish you. It put you there so that when you finally saw the trick, you would never again be fooled by anyone's version of you. And that clarity, once it arrives, settles in deep and refuses to leave. It becomes the floor you stand on. This is the part that they were most afraid of, and it is only beginning. That is why the powerful man's whisper landed the way it did. He was not looking at any mirror. He looked past all of them, straight at the thing they spent years hiding from you. And when he saw it, he said your name, untouchable, unshaped, unowned. Now stay close, because the next thing we uncover is the exact weapon they never realized they were arming in your hands. They think your silence is emptiness. They could not be more wrong, and their mistake is the most dangerous one they will ever make. Nothing scares a manipulator more than a silence they cannot read. When you go quiet, they do not experience peace. They experience free fall. Because a person who talks reveals himself, and a person who reveals himself can be managed, predicted, steered. But you stopped revealing. You went still, and in that stillness they lost the map they used to navigate you. Imagine this, a frozen lake at midnight, perfectly smooth, perfectly calm on the surface. Someone stands at the edge, terrified, because they cannot see how deep it goes or what moves beneath. That is what your silence is to them, not the absence of a threat, the presence of one they cannot measure. They would give anything for you to shout, to explain, to react, because reaction is information, and information is control. Your silence gives them nothing, and nothing is the one thing they cannot fight. You might ask yourself whether staying quiet made you passive all those years. No, it made you unreadable, and those two things could not be further apart. Someone passive has given up and handed over the field. Someone unreadable is holding power in reserve, choosing not to spend it where it would be wasted. Every time you chose not to explain yourself to people who were only listening for a way in, you were not losing the exchange. You were refusing to hand them the only ammunition they knew how to use. I have watched loud people mistake noise for strength my entire life. They fill every gap with sound because silence exposes them to themselves. They cannot sit alone in a quiet room without reaching for a distraction, because the quiet whispers back everything they are running from. You, chosen one, learned to live in that quiet. You built a home in the very place they cannot survive for 5 minutes. That is not something you did wrong. That is a rare and terrifying kind of strength, and they always sensed it in you, even when you didn't. Here's the part that unsettles them most. Your silence keeps working when you are not even in the room. They replay your calm face and cannot decode it. They wonder what you know that they don't. They mistake your restraint for a strategy so deep they cannot see the bottom of it. And sometimes they are right, and sometimes you weren't strategizing at all, and that uncertainty destroys them either way. A weapon that fires while you sleep is the only weapon they truly fear. That's not quietness. That's dominance, without a single word. They used to talk over you, remember? They filled every silence you left with their own noise, mistaking your restraint for permission. Now that same restraint returns to them at 3 in the morning, uninvited, and it does not let them sleep. Funny how that works. The quiet they once trampled is the quiet that now hunts them. And you did nothing. You simply stopped feeding them what they needed. Please, watch a loud person meet a silence they cannot break. It is like watching someone realize the floor was never solid. This is where they start whispering about you instead of to you. Not because you attacked, because you withdrew, and your withdrawal left a shape in the air the size of everything they could not control. That whisper of your name in the frozen room, remember it, was the sound of a powerful man recognizing a silence he respected instead of feared. And the ones who feared it, the loud ones, went pale in that same moment, because they finally understood what he understood. Now hold that, because the next thing we open is the reason they misread you so completely, word by word, and why every insult they crafted was actually a map they were drawing straight to your strength. They spent years building a vocabulary for you, and every word in it was wrong. That is the part they will never understand. When people cannot control someone, they reach for language, because if they cannot own your actions, they will at least try to own your definition. So they named you difficult, cold, arrogant, overthinking, too serious. Every label a small hook they hoped would catch in your mind and stay there. And for a while, some of them did. You carried words that were never yours, given to you by people who could not pronounce their own fear out loud. Let me decode them one more time, deeper now, because the surface translation was only the beginning. When they called you difficult, what they meant was that you refused to be easy to use. Easy people bend on command. You did not bend, so they renamed your spine a problem. When they called you cold, what they meant was that you stopped performing warmth for people who gave you nothing back. Your warmth was real once, and they spent it, and when the well went quiet, they called the quiet coldness, rather than admit they drained it dry. When they called you arrogant, what they meant was that you finally stopped apologizing for existing. There is a specific kind of person who reads another person's self-respect as an insult, because their whole identity depends on you feeling smaller than them. The moment you stood at full height, without shrinking, without softening it with an apology, they did not see confidence. They saw a threat to the hierarchy they had quietly placed you at the bottom of. And when they called you an overthinker, oh, that one is my favorite, because what they meant was that you noticed. You noticed the inconsistencies. You noticed the manipulations. You noticed the gap between what they said and what they did. Imagine this. A chessboard mid-game, and one player is moving pieces while the other is still setting up, still arranging, still pretending it is not a game at all. They called your noticing overthinking, because a person who sees the whole board cannot be tricked by a single move. They needed you to distrust your own perception. They needed you to believe your instincts were paranoia, your pattern recognition was anxiety, your clarity was a flaw. Because a person who trusts what they see is a person no manipulator can walk past. That is why they attacked the one thing that protected you most. You might ask yourself whether you really did overthink, whether maybe they were right and you were just too much in your own head. No. You were reading the room while they were performing in it. Fear that spins in circles and clarity that sees the exit are not the same thing, and they deliberately blurred the line between them so you would treat your own vision as a disorder. But your instincts were never the malfunction, chosen one. Your instincts were the alarm system, and they spent years trying to disconnect it because it kept going off around them for a very good reason. Here's the part that turns the whole thing over. Every label they gave you was a confession. People do not attack randomly. They attack the specific quality that endangers them most. So read their insults backward and you get a map of your own power. Difficult means uncontrollable. Cold means self-contained. Read it back to them slowly. Arrogant means self-respecting. Overthinker means perceptive. They handed you a decoder to your own strength and called it criticism. They thought they were describing your flaws. Instead, they were listing every reason they could never win. I have watched 100 people flinch at these words and shrink to fit them. I did it myself a long time ago before I understood the game. It took me years to realize that the words aimed at me most often were pointing at the exact traits that later made me impossible to manage. Once I saw it, I never flinched at a label again. Now, when someone tries to name me, to control me, I simply hear the fear underneath the word, and the fear tells me everything. I learned to listen for what they were protecting when they threw a name at me, and it was always themselves. They hate that you are learning to translate them. They hate it because their labels only worked while you believed them, and belief is the one thing you are withdrawing now. Strip the meaning out of their words, and their words become noise, and noise is all they ever had. This is where the ground shifts under them, because the man who whispered your name in that frozen room, remember him? He did not use a single one of their labels. He looked past every distortion and named you plainly, and in doing so, he told the whole room that their entire vocabulary about you was a lie. Now stay with me, because the next thing we open is the wound underneath all of it, the pain you carried alone, and it deserves to be named without a single soft lie wrapped around it. There is a specific kind of pain that never gets spoken, and you know it better than anyone. It is the pain of being underestimated by people who are never once qualified to measure you. They ranked you. They filed you. They decided in a glance what you were capable of, and they were wrong every time, and they never once updated the verdict. You watched lesser people be handed things you earned. You watched confidence be rewarded over competence. You watched the loud get the credit while the quiet did the work. And you said nothing, because who would have believed you, and what would it have changed? I will not soften this part, because softening it would be an insult to what you carried. The betrayal was real. Not the small kind, the deep kind. The kind that comes from the people you let close, the ones who ate at your table and studied your soft spots of the same meal. You trusted, and trust was treated as an opening. You opened a door, and someone mapped the room while you weren't looking. That is a specific cold, the cold of realizing that the closeness you cherished was, for them, reconnaissance. And it happened more than once, because you kept believing people could be as loyal as you were. Then there was the loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, the far heavier loneliness of being surrounded and still unseen. You could be in a full room, in a full life, with people who claim to know you, and feel like a stranger at your own table. Because they knew a version of you, a convenient version, a version that served them. The real you, the one underneath all the mirrors, stayed unseen for years, and there is no ache quite like being invisible in a crowd of people who insist they see you clearly. And the humiliation. The quiet, ongoing humiliation of making yourself smaller so others could feel tall. You dimmed your own light in rooms where a bright light would have exposed how dim everyone else was. You held back answers you knew were right so you would not embarrass the person who was wrong. You let credit slide to people who did not earn it, because taking your own credit felt like starting a war you were too tired to fight. That is not weakness, but it cost you. It cost you years of feeling like your own presence was something to apologize for. I have sat across from people carrying exactly this, and I have watched them assume they were broken. They were not broken. They were bearing weight that most people never even lift, and they were doing it silently, which made it invisible, which made it lonelier still. I have carried versions of this myself, and I will tell you the thing no one told me when I needed it. The fact that it hurt this much is not evidence that you are fragile. It is evidence of how much you felt, how deeply you cared, how real your loyalty was in a place that did not deserve it. You might ask yourself whether feeling all of this so deeply was your flaw, whether a tougher person would have shrugged it off. No, a shallow person shrugs it off because there was nothing deep to wound. You felt it because there was depth to reach. A betrayal cut because you were capable of real loyalty. The invisibility ached because you had a real self worth seeing. And the humiliation stung for one reason only, that you had genuine light in you worth dimming. Your pain is not proof of weakness, chosen one. It is proof of everything valuable in you that they were too small to hold. And here is where the frozen room returns to you, because it matters right here. That whisper of your name did not come from someone who pitied you. It came from someone who recognized what all that pain had forged. The people who wounded you were writing something into you without knowing it, sharpening something in the dark. And one day a person who actually mattered looked at you and saw the blade that all those years had made. This is where the transformation begins in earnest. Not by erasing the pain, but by understanding what the pain was quietly building. Now stay very close, because the next thing we open is the first true translation of your power, the moment your softness stops being a wound and reveals itself as the weapon it always secretly was. Picture the softest thing about you, the part they always aimed for first, and now watch it turn into the edge they never saw coming. For your whole life they told you that your gentleness was a liability, soft-hearted, too kind, too forgiving. They said it like a diagnosis, like a thing to be corrected. And you half believed them because your kindness kept getting punished, and it is hard to keep valuing a trait that seems to cost you everything. But here is the reversal they never saw coming. Your softness, in the hands of people who understood it, would have been safe. In the hands of people who abused it, it became the most dangerous thing in the room, because it made you underestimated, and underestimation is the perfect disguise. Imagine this. A blade resting in fire, blowing, being folded again and again by a patient hand. Every fold looks like damage. Every strike of the hammer looks like harm. But folding is not breaking. Folding is how a blade becomes unbreakable. Softness that survives the fire does not stay soft in the way they think. It becomes something layered, tempered, capable of holding an edge that brittle things never could. They mistook your kindness for the metal before the forge. They never understood they were watching the forging itself. They hate that they cannot use your kindness against you anymore. For years it worked. They pulled on your compassion and you gave and gave, because giving was your nature. But something changed. You kept your kindness and lost your naivete, and those two are not the same, though they always traveled together before. Now you can be warm without being open to the wrong hands. You can be generous without being drained. You can forgive without forgetting the lesson. That's not you getting colder. That's you getting calibrated. You might ask yourself whether keeping your softness after everything makes you a fool who never learned. No. A fool gives to everyone. You now give with precision. An open hand that anyone can reach into, and an open hand that chooses exactly whom it opens for, are two completely different things. You did not lose your heart. You installed a door on it, and you learned who gets a key. The ones who abused your kindness assumed you would either stay a doormat or become a wall. You became neither. You became something they have no category for, and things without a category cannot be predicted, and things that cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. I watched this exact reversal in someone I mentored years ago, a person so kind that predators circled him like they had found an easy meal. For years they fed on it. And then one season everything changed, not because he became cruel, but because he became discerning. He kept every ounce of his warmth and simply stopped pointing it at people who took without giving. Within a year, the same predators were confused, then frustrated, then gone, because the food supply had quietly closed while the person looked exactly the same on the outside. I watched their faces when they realized the softness was still there, but they could no longer reach it. It was the face of someone who lost a weapon they thought they owned. Funny how the people who called you too kind are the same people who benefited most from that kindness. They never wanted you to lose your softness. They wanted you to keep it pointed at them. The insult was never sincere. It was maintenance. Keep him feeling guilty for having boundaries, and he will keep leaving the door open. That was the whole game. And the moment you saw it, the game ended, and they felt the loss immediately, even if they could not name it. Please, watch someone try to guilt a person who has finally understood their own kindness. It does not land anymore. It just echoes. This connects straight back to that frozen room, because the man who whispered your name was not fooled by the softness the way the small ones were. He looked at your kindness and did not see prey. He saw a rare and disciplined strength, warmth that had survived the fire and come out tempered, and that is exactly the kind of person the powerful learn to respect and the weak learn to fear. Your gentleness was never the thing that made you a target. It was the thing that made you underestimated right up until the moment you weren't. Now hold that tempered blade close, because the next thing we open is patience, and you are about to learn that what looked like waiting was actually a verdict being written in slow, deliberate ink. Here is where the block order shifts, so watch this closely. Imagine this. A sniper lying perfectly still on a ridge, unmoving for hours, breathing slow, letting the wind settle, letting the target grow comfortable, letting the target forget he is even being watched. To an untrained eye, that stillness looks like nothing is happening. To anyone who understands, that stillness is the most active moment of all. Everything is happening in that stillness. The calculation, the timing, the certainty. That is what your patience looked like to them. It looked like nothing. It was actually everything. Gathering, waiting for the exact moment the wind of circumstance would settle in your favor. I have watched impatient people destroy themselves purely on their own timeline. They could not wait for the right moment, so they forced the wrong one, and the wrong moment took them down. Meanwhile, I watched patient people simply outlast every storm that impatience walked straight into. It took me a long time to understand that time itself is loyal to the patient, because time exposes what haste conceals. The liar's lie unravels with time. The pretender's mask slips with time. The manipulator's pattern becomes visible with time. And you, chosen one, had time on your side the entire time you thought you were just waiting. They mistook your patience for passivity, and that mistake is the reason they never saw the ending coming. To them, waiting meant weakness. If you were not fighting back loudly, if you were not defending yourself, if you were not scrambling to correct every lie they told about you, then surely you were beaten. That was the assumption they built their whole strategy on. And it was the wrong assumption, the kind of wrong that decides the entire outcome before anyone realizes the game is being played. Because your patience was never surrender. Your patience was aim. Here's the truth they will never admit. Impatience is what they run on. They need fast reactions, quick wins, immediate applause. They cannot wait, because waiting forces them to sit with themselves, and they cannot stand their own company for long. So they mistook your ability to wait for a lack of will, when in fact it was a surplus of it. It takes almost nothing to react. It takes enormous strength to hold. Every time you did not take the bait, every time you let a provocation pass, every time you refused to give them the fight they wanted, you were not losing. You were denying them the only tempo they knew how to fight in. They hate that they cannot provoke you into a mistake anymore. That was their whole method. Poke until you react, then use your reaction against you. It works beautifully on impatient people. It does nothing to a patient one. You learned to let the provocation hang in the air until it curdled. And there is nothing more disorienting to a provoker than a provocation that goes nowhere, that just sits there, exposing them as the aggressor while you remain untouched. That's not you being slow. That's you being deliberate. And deliberate people arrive exactly when they decide to, not when they are pulled. Funny how the ones who mocked you for waiting are the ones who burned out running. They sprinted. They needed everything now. And now, remember the loud ones who went quiet? They're quiet in part because they exhausted themselves on a timeline they could not sustain. You paced yourself. You conserved. You let the game come to you. And the game did. Please, watch someone who lives on impatience try to outlast someone who mastered patience. It is not a contest. It is a countdown. And only one of them hears the clock. You might ask yourself whether all those years of waiting were just you being too afraid to act. No, you were not afraid. You were timing. Someone frozen by fear and someone holding their fire until the shot is guaranteed can look identical from the outside, and they leaned on that resemblance on purpose, because a frightened person can be pushed, and a patient person cannot. They needed you to believe your restraint was cowardice, because the day you understood it was strategy, you would stop apologizing for it and start wielding it. And a person who wields their patience deliberately is a person no one can rush into a mistake. This is exactly what the man in the frozen room recognized when he whispered your name. Powerful people understand patience because they have it themselves. They know that the ones who wait are the ones who last, and the ones who last are the ones who matter. He did not see a passive man in you. He saw a patient one, and to someone who understands the long game, patience is not weakness. It is the signature of someone playing on a timescale the loud ones cannot even perceive. Now stay with me, because the next thing we open is the strange law of loud and quiet, the reason the noisy always fall first, and the still rise last and forever. Imagine this. An iceberg, vast and silent, with only a fraction of itself visible above the water. The loud person is the splashing of the surface, all noise and spray and visible motion. You are the mass beneath, unseen, unhurried, holding the weight that keeps the whole thing standing. Ships do not fear the splash. They fear the mass they cannot see. And when the two collide, it is never the quiet mass that shatters. The loud have height above the water and nothing below it. You have depth below the water and never needed the height. Keep that image close, because in a moment you will see exactly where the universe set you down. There is a law that governs loud people, and once you notice it, it starts showing up everywhere you look. The loud fall first, always. Not sometimes, always. It is written into the physics of how noise works. A loud person spends everything at the surface. Every ounce of their energy goes into being seen, being heard, being felt in the immediate moment. There is nothing left underneath, because they poured it all into the display. And a thing with nothing underneath cannot survive pressure, because the moment the surface cracks, there is only more surface behind it, all the way down to empty. You might ask yourself whether staying quiet meant you missed your chance to be seen, to be counted, to rise while others took the spotlight. No, you were building the part that lasts while they were renting the part that fades. Rising fast and rising for good are two entirely different things, and they never learned the second one, because fast rising is the only kind that feeds the loud person's hunger. But fast up means fast down. Height bought with noise is height rented, not owned, and rented height gets repossessed the moment the noise runs out. You were never renting. You were laying foundation in the dark, and foundation does not fall. Here's the part that unsettles them most. The quiet rise last, and last is not a disadvantage. Last is permanent. The loud rise early and fall early, cycling through the same climb and collapse again and again, exhausting themselves on a wheel that never stops. The quiet climb slowly and stop climbing only when they reach a height that holds. Ask yourself which you would rather have, the height that comes fast and leaves fast, or the height that comes slow and stays for the rest of your life. The loud never even get to ask that question, because their hunger answers it for them every single time. They hate that your rise does not follow their rules. They can predict the loud. The loud are simple, boom and bust, spike and crash, easy to time and easy to outlast. But your rise has no spike for them to predict, and no crash for them to wait out. It just continues, quietly, steadily, in a direction they cannot chart. That's not you falling behind. That's you building something that cannot fall at all. And a rise with no crash in it terrifies people whose entire survival depends on other people eventually crashing. I have watched the loud rise like fireworks and fall like ash more times than I can count. Bright, sudden, gone. And I have watched the quiet rise like a tide, so slowly that no one noticed until the water was everywhere and there was no going back. It took me years to trust the tide in myself because the culture worships the firework and mocks the tide for being slow. But fireworks are for a single night. The tide reshapes the coastline. I learned to stop envying the flash and start respecting the water, and everything changed once I did. And that quiet rising is exactly what moved you somewhere they can no longer reach. Meanwhile, the loud ones who trampled you are already cycling through their next crash, and their next, and their next, while your line only goes one direction. Funny how the people who seemed so far ahead were just further along a wheel, and you were on a road. A wheel returns to where it started, a road does not. And this connects straight to that frozen room, because the whisper of your name was the sound of someone recognizing the tide instead of the firework. He was not impressed by noise. He had seen 1,000 loud men rise and fall. He whispered your name because he recognized the rare thing that rises and stays. Now hold that, because the next thing we open is the exact moment the universe moved you off the losing side of the board and onto the untouchable one, and you were not even watching when it happened. There was a moment, a single specific moment, when everything changed, and the tragedy is that you probably did not notice it happening. It rarely announces itself. There is no thunder, no sign in the sky, no voice from above. There is just a quiet shift, a whisper in the machinery of your life, a glitch in the pattern that had held you down for so long. And in that whisper, the universe quietly moved you from one category to another, from the underestimated to the untouchable, from the overlooked to the inevitable. And it did it so softly that you almost missed it entirely. Imagine this. A vast game with countless pieces, and most of the pieces are moved by other hands. Then, in one turn, without any noise, a single piece is quietly lifted off the losing side of the board and set down on a square no opposing piece can reach. No announcement, no fanfare, just a repositioning so subtle that even the piece itself does not realize it has been made safe. That piece was you. And the shift happened not because you finally won a loud victory, but because something in the underlying logic of your story simply changed, and the change was permanent. You might ask yourself when exactly this happened, what the moment was, whether you can even point to it. No, you cannot point to it, and that is the proof it was real. The loud, visible turning points are the ones that fade. The real shift is quiet, structural, underneath everything, the kind you only recognize looking backward. Maybe it was the moment you stopped arguing with the mirrors. Maybe it was the moment you kept your kindness but lost your naivety. Maybe it was the moment your patience finally revealed itself to you as strategy instead of shame. Somewhere in there, without permission, the universe changed your standing, and nobody signed off on it, and nobody could reverse it. Here's the truth they will never admit. They felt the shift before you did. This is the part that stuns people. The ones who kept you down often sense your rise before you do, because they are watching you more closely than you are watching yourself. They noticed you stopped flinching. They noticed the provocations stopped landing. They noticed the silence got deeper and the reactions got fewer. And somewhere in their gut, an alarm went off that they could not explain. They started treating you differently before you understood why, and their behavior was the first evidence of a shift you had not yet felt. They hate that the shift already happened and cannot be undone. There is no move they can make to put you back in the old category. They can lie about you, they can whisper, they can try to rebuild the mirrors. None of it reaches the square you now stand on, because the shift was not about your reputation. It was about your position in the deeper structure of your own life. That's not luck finding you late. That's the universe correcting a placement that was always wrong. And a correction at that level does not get appealed. I have seen this shift arrive in people's lives right before their eyes, and I have watched them miss it completely, still braced for the old fight, still expecting the old outcome, unaware that the ground had already moved beneath them. I missed my own for the longest time. I kept fighting battles that were already decided in my favor, defending a position that no longer needed defending. When I finally saw that the shift had already come, I felt almost foolish for how hard I had kept struggling against an enemy who had already lost. That recognition is one of the strangest reliefs a person can feel. And here, chosen one, is where the frozen room finally begins to make sense, though we are not done with it yet. The whisper of your name was not the cause of the shift. It was the evidence of it. A powerful man does not whisper the name of someone still on the losing side of the board. He whispers the name of someone who has already, quietly, been moved to the untouchable square. He felt the shift the way they all did, and unlike the small ones who feared it, he named it. Now stay very close, because the next thing we open is what happens to your enemies once the shift is complete, the exact moment their masks begin to crack, and it is not a pretty thing to watch unless you are the one they wronged. Watch what happens to a mask when the person wearing it stops getting the reaction it was built to earn. It cracks. Slowly at first, a hairline fracture at the edge, then a web of them, then whole pieces falling away. The people who wronged you wore masks for years, and those masks worked perfectly as long as you played your assigned part. The moment you stopped playing it, the masks lost their function. And a mask that no longer functions does not just fail quietly, it fails visibly in front of everyone, and it takes the wearer's dignity down with it. Here is the mechanism, because you should understand exactly why it happens. A manipulator's mask is not held up by their own strength. It is held up by your reaction. Your fear feeds it. Your defensiveness feeds it. Your desperate attempts to prove yourself feed it. Every time you scrambled to correct their lie, you were pumping air into the very mask that hid their face. When you went still, when you stopped reacting, you stopped feeding it. And a mask that stops being fed by its target has nothing left to hold it up. So it begins to slide, and the face underneath begins to show. Imagine this: a performer on a stage who has played the same role for years, confident, commanding, believed by everyone. Then one day the audience stops responding. No applause, no gasps, no reaction at all. Just silence and steady eyes. And suddenly the performer forgets his lines, because his entire performance was built on feedback he is no longer receiving. He fumbles. He overacts to compensate. He gets louder, more desperate, more obvious. And the more he pushes, the more the whole room sees the sweat under the costume. That is your enemy right now, performing to a silence that will not applaud. You might ask yourself whether you did something to cause their unraveling, whether you should feel responsible for their collapse. No, you did nothing but stop participating. Attacking someone and simply declining to hold up the illusion they built are two entirely separate acts, and you only ever did the second one. You never pushed them, you just stopped catching them. And a person who was leaning their whole weight on your reaction discovers, the moment you step aside, that they were never standing on their own at all. Their fall is not your doing. It is gravity finally reaching a thing that was propped up by you. They hate that their masks are cracking in front of the very people they were performing for. This is the part that stings them most. For years they controlled the story about you in front of the audience that mattered. Now that same audience is watching the mask slip, and there is nothing they can do about it. Because the harder they try to fix the mask, the more obviously it cracks. That's not you exposing them. That's them exposing themselves the moment you stopped covering for them. The exposure was always inside them, waiting. You were just the surface they hid it behind, and you walked away. I have watched masks crack in real time, and it is a strange thing to witness. The person becomes almost frantic. They escalate. They say things they would never have said before, because desperation loosens the grip that discipline once held. They overplay their hand. They accuse you of the very things they are doing, hoping to redirect the audience's eyes. But the redirection only draws more attention to the crack. I have seen composed, respected people undo years of careful image management in a matter of weeks, purely because one person stopped reacting the way they needed. It was self-destruction with no attacker in sight. Funny how the loudest defenders of their own image become the loudest evidence against it. Remember the loud ones who went quiet when your name carried weight. Some of them do not go quiet. Some of them get louder, and the louder they get, the more they reveal, because loudness under pressure is confession disguised as defense. Please, watch a manipulator try to manage an audience that has started to see the crack. Every move they make to hide it points straight at it. Every word they say to cover it uncovers more. And the person they built the whole performance to control, you, simply stands there, unbothered, whole. This is precisely why the frozen room mattered so much. When the powerful man whispered your name, the masks in that room felt it before their wearers did. The small ones, the loud ones, the ones with the most invested in the old story about you, felt their masks go cold in that instant, because the whisper told the whole room that the real story was different from the one they had been performing. A single quiet word from someone who mattered cracked every mask that depended on you being small. Now stay with me, because the next thing we open is the deepest layer of all, the true reason the loudest one fears you more than anyone, the reason he cannot sleep. There is one person who fears you more than all the others combined, and it is not the one you would expect. It is not the coldest one or the cruelest one. It is the loudest one, the one who talked over you most, the one who performed the most dominance, who took the most credit, who seemed the most unbothered by your existence. That one fears you more than anyone alive, and his fear has a specific source, and once you understand it, you will understand why he cannot sleep while you rest easy. Here is the reason. The loudest one fears you because, on some level he will never admit even to himself, he knows. He knows you saw through him. He knows that behind all his noise, you were quietly reading him the entire time, and he knows that you never bought the performance the way the others did. That knowledge is unbearable to him, because his whole identity depends on the performance being believed. And there you are, the one person who witnessed him without applause, the one set of eyes that never reflected the image he needed to see. You are the mirror he cannot bear to look into, because you show him what he actually is. Imagine this. A man who has convinced an entire room that he is a giant, standing on a box that only he knows is there. Everyone else sees the height. Only one person in the room saw him step onto the box. That one person does not even have to say anything. Their mere presence is a threat, because they hold the one fact that could bring the whole illusion down. He does not fear your words. He fears your knowledge. He fears that you saw the box, and that one day, with a single quiet sentence, you might simply mention it. And so he watches you, and he cannot rest, because a witness who stays silent is a witness whose silence could break at any moment. You might ask yourself whether you really have that kind of power over someone so loud and so confident. No, you might think. Surely he does not think about me at all. But you are wrong about that, and pleasantly so. The loud think about the quiet witness constantly, precisely because the witness gives them nothing to go on. He would sleep fine if you had attacked him, because an attack he could counter. He would sleep fine if you had crumbled, because a broken witness discredits himself. But you did neither. You simply saw, and stayed whole, and stayed quiet. And that combination is the one thing his entire arsenal cannot address. They hate that their fear of you has no cure. There is no move that resolves it. He cannot befriend you into forgetting, because you already saw. He cannot silence you into safety, because you never spoke, so there is nothing left to silence. He cannot outperform you, because you were never in the performance. That's not paranoia eating at him. That's the accurate knowledge that the one person who saw the truth is still standing, still calm, and completely beyond his reach. And accurate fear is the worst kind, because it cannot be reasoned away. I have known men like this, the loud ones who cannot sleep, and I have watched their fear of the quiet witness slowly consume them from the inside. They become obsessed with what the witness might be thinking. They read meaning into every silence. They interpret your calm as a plot, your peace as a scheme, your indifference as a strategy so deep they cannot find the bottom. The truth is usually simpler than their fear, but their fear does not care about the truth. Their fear only knows that you saw the box, and that you never needed to say a word to make them feel it every single day. And now the frozen room reveals its deepest meaning, because the man who whispered your name understood all of this. He was powerful precisely because he could read a room, and he read yours. He saw the loud one performing, and he saw you, the quiet witness who never applauded. And he knew instantly which of you held the real weight. When he whispered your name, he was not just recognizing you. He was quietly informing the loudest one in the room that the game was over, that the witness had been acknowledged by someone who mattered, and that the box everyone else could not see was about to become visible. The loud one heard his own ending in your name. Now hold that, Because the next thing we open is the point of no return, the exact place from which your enemies can never come back. Every story like this has a point of no return, and yours has already been crossed. That is the part that should settle something deep in you tonight. It is not coming, it is behind you. The line has been passed, and lines like this only work in one direction. There is a specific moment in the fall of the people who wronged you, a moment after which recovery becomes impossible. And the strange mercy of it is that the moment is quiet, almost invisible, and it has already happened whether they realize it or not. Here is what the point of no return actually is. It is the moment the audience shifts. Not the moment they turn against your enemy, that comes later and louder. The point of no return is subtler. It is the moment the people watching stop automatically believing the loud one and start quietly watching you instead. It is a shift in the default. For years, the default was that they were right and you were the problem. The point of no return is when the default silently flips, when the room's unspoken assumption becomes that you are the one worth listening to, and they are the one worth doubting. And once a default flips, it does not flip back. Imagine this. A long rope bridge over a deep ravine, and someone has been crossing it for years, confident, unbothered, treating it as permanent. Then, one plank at a time, so slowly they do not notice, the boards behind them fall away into the dark. They keep walking forward, still performing confidence, unaware that the path back no longer exists. There is a specific plank, one specific step, after which return became impossible. Your enemies are past that plank. They are still walking, still talking, still performing, and behind them there is nothing but air. The point of no return was a plank they stepped off without looking down. You might ask yourself whether it is too late for reconciliation, whether some part of you should reach back and offer them a way to return. No. Understand this clearly. The point of no return is not about your forgiveness. You may forgive whomever you choose. It is about their position. Even if you opened your hand fully, they could not return to the standing they had, because that standing was built on an illusion that has already collapsed. You are not the one keeping them out. The collapsed structure is. There is simply no floor left for them to stand on where they used to stand, and no gesture from you can rebuild a floor that reality removed. They hate that they cannot undo it. This is the specific torment of the point of no return. They can feel that something is gone, and they claw to get it back, and the clawing accomplishes nothing, because what they lost was not a thing they can grab. It was credibility, and credibility spent on a lie does not refund. That's not you refusing to let them back in. That's the door having quietly ceased to exist the moment they crossed the line they thought was safe. And a door that no longer exists cannot be opened by anyone, not even by you. I have watched people cross their point of no return in real time, still smiling, still confident, utterly unaware that the decisive plank had already fallen. And I have watched the slow horror on their faces months later when they finally turned around and saw the void behind them. There is no cruelty in it. It is just consequence, arriving on its own schedule. I learned long ago to stop warning such people because the warning never lands, and because the point of no return is not mine to move. It belongs to the structure of things, and the structure keeps its own accounts with perfect, patient accuracy. And here is where the frozen room and the point of no return meet, because they are the same event seen from two angles. The whisper of your name was the sound of the last plank falling behind your enemies. In that instant, when a powerful man spoke your name softly and the room froze, the default flipped in front of everyone. The audience shifted. The old story died, and the loud ones, remember them, felt the floor vanish beneath the position they had held over you for years. They just did not know yet that there was no walking it back. Now stay very close, because the next thing we open is the final revelation, the truth that all of this was always moving toward, the reason you are never a victim, but an inevitability. Now we come to the truth that all of this was always moving toward, and I need you to receive it fully, because it changes how you will walk out of this night. You were never a victim. You were an inevitability. Everything that was done to you, every mirror, every label, every betrayal, every silence you endured, was not the story of someone being broken. It was the story of someone being forged. The people who hurt you were not the authors of your defeat. They were, without ever meaning to be, the instruments of your becoming. And an inevitability cannot be stopped by the very forces that shaped it. Understand what that word means. An inevitability is not something that might happen. It is something that must. The pressure they applied did not weaken the structure of you. It compressed it into something denser, harder, more concentrated than the people around you could ever become in comfort. Comfort makes soft things. Pressure makes permanent ones. They handed you pressure for years, thinking they were crushing you, and instead they were performing the exact process that turns ordinary carbon into the hardest substance there is. You did not survive them. You were formed by the surviving. Imagine this: a river and a stone. The river is loud, fast, always moving, always certain of its power, and it strikes the stone again and again, year after year, convinced it is wearing the stone down. And in a sense it is. But look closely at what the river actually makes. It does not make rubble. It makes something smooth, shaped, refined, a stone that could exist no other way. The river thinks it is destroying. It is sculpting. Your enemies were the river. You are the stone the river spent years shaping into exactly the form that now stands beyond their reach. They made you smooth where they meant to make you gone. You might ask yourself, one last time, whether any of this was your fault, whether you attracted it, whether a stronger person would have avoided all of it. No. Lay that down now, permanently. You did not attract the river. You were placed in its path by a logic larger than the river's, and the river's striking was never about your worth. It was about your formation. Being punished and being prepared can feel identical while you are living through them, yet everything in you that they tried to punish is now the very thing that makes you ready for a standing they will never reach. The pain was not a verdict on you, it was the shaping of you. They hate more than anything that they were part of your making. This is the final unbearable truth for them. They wanted to be your ending, and instead they were your forge. Every blow they meant as destruction, you converted into structure. Every wound they meant as a stopping point, you turned into a foundation stone. That's not you surviving despite them. That's you being built, in part, by the very people who swore you would never rise. And to a person who wanted to break you, nothing is more intolerable than learning they helped build you instead. I have lived long enough to see this pattern complete itself many times, and it never stops moving me. The ones who are struck hardest, shaped hardest, pressured hardest, are so often the ones who end up standing longest and standing highest. Not because suffering is good, it never is, and I will not pretend otherwise to you tonight, but because a certain kind of person does not shatter under pressure. They compress, They densify. They become inevitable. I have watched it in others, and I have felt it in the shape of my own life, and I have come to trust it completely. The forge is real, and the ones it does not destroy, it finishes. And now, at last, the frozen room gives up its full meaning. The whisper of your name. The powerful man who went quiet and spoke it softly while the room stopped breathing. He was not blessing you with importance. He was recognizing something that was already true. He looked at you and saw an inevitability standing where everyone else saw a survivor. He whispered your name because names spoken softly by people who understand weight are not compliments. They are acknowledgments. He acknowledged what the river had made. And the loud ones froze because, in that instant, they understood that the person they tried to erase had become the person whose name silences rooms. So let me close the way I opened, with you sitting there, breathing, changed. You walked in carrying labels that were never yours and mirrors that were never true. You are walking out understanding that your silence was dominance, your patience was aim, your softness was a tempered blade, and your suffering was a forge. The shift has already happened. The plank has already fallen behind your enemies. The masks have already begun to crack. And the name that was whispered in that frozen room was and is and will remain yours. If you felt even one moment of this settle into a place words don't usually reach, let this video be the marker of the night it turned. Save it. Return to it. And let the people who need to hear their own name whispered find their way here too. The forge does not undo itself. What it made for good. And what it made, chosen one, is you.